Welcome back, everybody, to the final episode of our Offseason Blueprints Fix Your Team series here, the AFC South. Thank you for your patience, AFC South fans. We made it, and let's get right into it. Here's trying to fix this mess of a division, honestly. We're going to start with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Please do hit that like button if you enjoy this video or have enjoyed the series. Really appreciate it. So the Jags, obviously, number one overall pick, worst team in football again last year, despite landing Trevor Lawrence, who had a bit of a rough season as a rookie. It's all about really getting him to take that year two leap. You feel very good about his future outlook, but you have to put the right pieces around him, which they obviously did not do last year. Injuries did not help with guys like ETN and DJ Chark going down. So that's the game plan this offseason. It's not overly complicated. They have $39 million in cap space. That's the fifth most in the league. I expect this team to be pretty dang active in free agency. Now, they have a decent list of impending free agents themselves. This obviously wasn't a team that was swimming in talent, but they have some names here that are worth noting. So, three of their wide receivers that got significant playing time last season are impending free agents: DJ Chark, Tavon Austin, and Laquan Treadwell, former first-round pick of the Minnesota Vikings that had a decent little year down there in Jacksonville. Then Carlos Hyde is gone. Free James Robinson. Free Travis Etienne. Now that Urban Meyer is gone. Then on the offensive line, they're losing both starting guards. I didn't realize. I knew Norwell was. I actually didn't realize AJ Cann was also an impending free agent. So that's a pretty major need there. And then on the defense, just losing a couple technically starters, but nobody that you're going to miss. Damian Wilson at linebacker, Taven Bryan, a bust of a former first-round pick, and Trey Herndon. So, a bunch of guys that you're pretty willing to let go. But one guy that I'm just really surprised that Jacksonville is letting out of the building is DJ Chark. So they used the franchise tag on their left tackle, Cam Robinson, for the second year in a row. I think you got to be critical of that decision. I would have used it on DJ Chark. I think Chark is going to have a big market. It's a guy that when he's been healthy has really shown to be one of the premium deep threats in the league. He went down before he could really establish anything with Trevor Lawrence. That wide receiver room is really rough. So I think it's fair to be critical of the Jags, especially because they have the number one pick. And they have the top pick in the second round, but they're probably not drafting a receiver in the first round this year. So you're losing your best receiver and who would most likely be your best receiver next year. They didn't make a play for Amari Cooper. And this is kind of similar to me on a smaller scale of when they let Allen Robinson out of the building and just kind of let him walk. So I think it's fair to be critical of that. I would have tried to re-sign him, but at this point in time, legal tampering starts tomorrow. So it's looking like he's gone. And that wide receiver position is going to be a mess as you head into free agency and the draft. As far as the rest of these guys, I think with Chark leaving, I think getting Laquan Treadwell back on a one-year deal, who showed to have a nice rapport with Trevor Lawrence, I think that's actually pretty smart. So that wouldn't cost much, probably 1 year, $3 or $4 million. You gotta fill in that wide receiver room somewhere. The other two guys, Andrew Norwell, AJ Cann, they're going to hit the market at this point. So discussing re-signing them, it feels almost like a waste of time. I probably would have tried to get one of those guys back, but here we are. So as they head into free agency, really wide receiver and interior offensive line are going to be your big needs. The defense in general is a complete disaster as well. Interior defensive line needs help. Edge number 2 needs help because K'Lavon Chaisson just hasn't shown an ounce of development in the league, but it does look like they're going to draft Aiden Hutchinson number 1 overall. So that would clear that up, obviously. Safety needs help. You need a slot cornerback. You do have 2 good starters on the outside at cornerback here at least. But yeah, those are your needs. So as far as free agency goes, some options for wide receiver for them. It's not completely bleak after DJ Chark, but you have to do a good recruiting effort. You have to sell some of these top guys on Jacksonville being an appealing place. And I think getting a vertical threat for Trevor Lawrence is got to be at the top of your list, because he really is a good deep ball thrower when he has a guy that can separate deep, and he didn't have that last year with Chark going down. You still have Marvin Jones on the roster. You have Laviska Shenault, who's kind of this playmaking slot guy. We don't really know what other rookies are going to be coming in and what their styles are going to be, but what I do know is what's missing is that vertical threat, because Marvin Jones at this point in his career, he's a lot better in the intermediate part of the game than he is separating deep. So if you're losing DJ Chark, I look at Will Fuller as a almost equal counterpart to DJ Chark. A guy like Marquez Valdez-Scantling out of Green Bay, who showed really good tape last year but couldn't stay healthy. Or James Washington in Pittsburgh, who is just a really good guy at kind of, he's not a burner. He has like 4.5 speed, but he's just so big. Like, he's thick. He's not tall necessarily, but what he's able to do is brush off contact as he accelerates vertically down the field, and then he uses that frame to kind of fight through arm contact and come down with really tough catches down the field. And with Big Ben deteriorating, he kind of flamed out in Pittsburgh. But I do think James Washington could be a nice fit in Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence. So those are three names that I think would make sense. And then I think if you go deeper down the list, there's other guys, maybe like a Jamison Crowder, or I doubt Keelan Cole would want to come back. Maybe he would, but something like that to be like a fourth wide receiver to provide some better depth here. And then on the interior offensive line, I think you're definitely still in touch with Norwell and AJ Cann, your right guard. You're in touch with their agents to try and get them back. They're solid players, but I think you're also, obviously, you're targeting Brandon Scherff. I think if you could get him in there, that's an immediate upgrade, a force multiplier to your offensive line. I think he's one of those guys that everyone around him becomes better because he's just such a mauler. So, you talk to the top guys, of course, but in reality, I think they're probably looking at this list of like starting caliber guards in free agency that they can pay somewhere from 8 to 10 million to come in here. So guys like Alex Kappa from the Bucks, Mark Glowinski from the Colts, even a guy like Ted Karras for the Patriots would be smart. Maybe a Laken Tomlinson, James Daniel, all these guys, Austin Corbett, all examples of guys that I think would be really smart signings for the Jags. You don't want to have Ben Bartch. I just don't really want Ben Bartch to be my starting guard when I'm way more focused on making sure Trevor Lawrence has everything he needs. Of course, you'd love it if Ben Bartch can establish himself as a starter, but I don't want to count on that. So that's really where I'm spending the most of my money, is wide receiver and interior offensive line. I do think because they do have a lot of cap space, if you're starting to kind of strike out with the offensive guys, I still would spend that money on the defense. And the positions I would spend it at are safety, because there's a lot of good safeties in this class. Tyrann Mathieu, Eric Reed, Justin Reed, Marcus Williams, Marcus May. Like there's some really good safeties hitting the market. They could use someone like that. Now, they just spent last summer, they had a contract that just made no sense. They gave the Chargers safety a huge contract. I could not believe Rashawn Jenkins. Like, what the hell is that? So they can upgrade at safety. And interior defensive tackle, I would not be surprised to see them go get one of these younger, ascending, starting caliber guys. So there's 4 names there that come to my mind. Shai Tuttle, Lorenzo Fatukasi from the Jets, BJ Hill for the Bengals, who had a good playoff run, and Tim Settle for the Washington football team, another name to keep an eye on the interior defensive line. Lastly, you could spend some money on a slot cornerback. Is that Bryce Callahan, K'Wan Williams, Desmond King? Those are all names that could be options for the Jags in free agency, where I think they will be pretty active here starting tomorrow. And then you can look ahead to the draft. For me, it seems pretty clear they're drafting Aiden Hutchinson with the first pick. He's like minus 300 odds on favorite right now. There's lot of reports that they're out on Evan Neal, who is my best player in this draft. I can't entirely blame them. I mean, and they franchise tagged Cam Robinson, which basically, signals to us what they feel about their tackle room. They feel fine there. But yeah, it seems like Hutchinson's going to be the number one pick. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it does make it harder to give the talent to Trevor Lawrence when you're spending it on defense. Like, I would shop the pick. I just think that's where I'm getting at here. I would shop it. Like, can you get someone that is in love with Aiden Hutchinson? And you're not going to get typical asking price for that number one pick because it's not a quarterback, and this draft class just isn't as good as years past. But, can you get an extra second, or can you get a future one or something like that for someone to come up? And I think you do it because if you can drop into the top half of the draft, and I don't know who it would be, I really don't, but say you can land at 10 or 12 or something like that, and get yourself a Garrett Wilson or a Jameson Williams, something like that would give you that number one receiver. I think that's actually what would be the best thing for the Jags, but they'd also be pretty crazy to take that guy with the number one overall pick. So that to me is what would be the best way for them to help Trevor Lawrence next year. But I'm not going to be critical of them for just drafting Aiden Hutchinson either. He's a damn good player. Him and Josh Allen together would be a really fun pass rushing duo. And at some point, you're going to need a defense there as well. So I'm not going to be critical of it. I'm just saying, if you could move down, theoretical trade here, let's say, I don't know, let's say Baltimore wants Hutchinson, reunite with his Michigan defensive coordinator, and they're willing to give you the 14th pick and a future one and a third round pick or something, something like that. I would think about it. I would really think about it because the number one pick in this year's draft just it's not like most years, especially if you aren't taking Evan Neal, who to me is the lone blue chip player in this draft. And then you have your second round pick. I think it's got to be a receiver, assuming you go Hutchinson 1. I think you could get a George Pickens, a Jahan Dotson, maybe Drake London, something like that to be a number one receiver for you. There's going to be a really good receiver, probably a first round caliber receiver available at the top of the second round. So I think they're taking Hutchinson. That seems pretty clear at this point in time. And then receiver at the top of the second. And then after that, you're just going best player available. You got fill in needs, maybe an interior offensive lineman in the third, but for the most part, you're going best player available, maximizing the talent you can add to this team. All right. Now we have the Tennessee Titans up with a pretty straightforward offseason. They've created this, they have a very clear path here. When they committed to Ryan Tannehill in the way that they did, they really were hoping to make a run last year. They get Julio Jones. They give a second round pick for that. They push Tannehill's contract into future seasons, which is making things more difficult for them. They have $350,000 in cap space, but no real true outs of the Ryan Tannehill situation. Really the only option for the Titans, and I'm sure most Titans fans are fine with this. Some might have the outlook of this is going nowhere with Ryan Tannehill, but your really only option here is to compete to win this division with Ryan Tannehill, just as you did last year, and hope things go right in the playoffs. They're far from a bad team. They just don't have a lot of room to necessarily improve their team. So with $350,000 in cap space, you can move a little bit of money around, but they have a pretty hefty list of free agents here, especially when you look at the offense. And all three of their tight ends are hitting the market. So Anthony Ferguson, Jeff Swaim, Mike Pruitt. None of them would cost a lot. And then on the offensive line, you have two major losses here. Aging veterans, Roger Saffold and Ben Jones, who have been rock stars for the Titans. And then even at right tackle, David Kessenberry, there might be a market for him. He was one of PFF's highest graded run blocking tackles in the entire league last year. Really cool story. He's a cancer survivor, kind of gets an opportunity here and literally runs with it. And losing him would be a downgrade at right tackle because the kid they drafted in the second round last year, his name's escaping me, he's an unproven commodity. So really 3 starters on this offensive line are hitting free agency. And then the 2 linebackers, face value might look rough, but they are more than equipped to replace those 2 players. They traded for Zach Cunningham. Actually, I think they picked him up, and he played well in the Rashaan Evans role. It was an upgrade to Rashaan Evans as a good run defender. And then they have, the names are just not coming to me today. But the other linebacker that really stepped up for them, I should look this up because he's a player that you are going to want to be aware of. He had a good season last year, kind of similar to Jayon Brown, as that more undersized linebacker, more coverage oriented, but a good run and chase tackler as well. Okay, here we go. David Long Jr. There it is. Yeah, ascending 6th round pick from 2019. So they're very well equipped to replace those linebackers. So for me, I'm really focusing my attention on getting those starters back on offense. If you can get Ben Jones back and Roger Saffold back, Anthony Firkser back, that's ideal. Now, there's going to be a big market for offensive linemen, just as there always is, and you could very easily get priced out of your starting center and your starting left guard. And that's going to become a major problem for the Titans if they lose those guys, because this offensive line has already been thinning. We have seen Tannehill not really get the best pass protection when they go to actual traditional drop back situations. That's always been my problem with the Titans is not only do I not trust Ryan Tannehill in, say, a 3rd and 8 situation to navigate pressure and push the ball downfield and extend plays and all that stuff in those difficult situations. But the offensive line hasn't been great in those areas either. So you could potentially be getting even worse there, which is far from ideal. So I would try to move cap around. I would try to get Ben Jones and Roger Saffold back. But it's just at this point in time, it feels unlikely that they're going to be able to get both those guys back. I also would want Anthony Firkser back. He's a good scheme fit, a guy that can separate over the middle of the field in this play action heavy offense. And he's got a good rapport with Ryan Tannehill on 3rd downs. Now, all these guys are players that you could potentially replace in free agency or the draft. But they're in a win now window. To lose good veteran starters like that is just never easy. So that's kind of where I'm focused. If you miss out on Jones or Saffold or Firkser, then you're targeting other players at those positions in free agency. But the rest of the roster is in pretty good shape. And then you turn to the draft. So it really depends, I think, on those 3 players, Ben Jones, Roger Saffold, Anthony Firkser, what happens at those spots. So if you miss out, I would also try to get David Kessenberry back as well, by the way. But he'd be a 4th priority there because you hope, while we have it up, we might as well get the tackle's name. I was drawing a blank on Dylan Radunes out of North Dakota State last year. You're obviously hoping maybe Radunes can fill in at right tackle next year for you. But Kessenberry played well. If you can get him back for cheap, you do that. But anyway, as you head to the draft, there's a good chance interior offensive line is a major need for you, and they're at a good spot to potentially get one of those guys. I look at 3 guards specifically. Zion Johnson would be my number 1, would be just a dream fit. He can play center or guard. Good move, not just a good move blocker, a great move blocker, a phenomenal athlete. Tyler Linderbaum to be a center for you if you lose Ben Jones. I think that's a name that's probably going to be there in the back end of the 1st round in the real draft. He's a damn good player, but there's a lot of concerns about his height and arm length and size. So he would be a plug-and-play center for you. Another guy would be the name recall right now is just brutal, probably because I woke up late this morning, but the Texas A&M guard, Kenyon Green, would be another great fit on this offensive line. So if you don't re-sign Saffold and Ben Jones, that's probably your priority in the draft. If you do, then you can look towards maybe a wide receiver, or hey, maybe you even think about the future a little bit. Balance, they've been pretty risky. Maybe you balance that win now approach with a little bit of a future outlook move and go with like a Matt Corral, who would just be a dream maybe not a dream fit. He's not a perfect quarterback prospect, but with his ability to throw in the move, his accuracy over the middle of the field, his arm talent, he could definitely fill in nicely into this system and be a really good quarterback for them within a year or two. So I think that's something you could think about. So that's really your Titans offseason is interior offensive line, tight end. I forgot to mention day 2 of the draft. There's a lot of tight ends. Maybe it's a Trey McBride, something like that. If you don't get Firkser back, you're not at a complete loss of hope at the tight end position. It's a deep class, even if there's no like first round talents. So it's a solid draft for them to kind of fill in their needs and use what money they can to retain their talent. And it's a pretty straightforward offseason for the Titans. And you run it back next year in a division that you hope is still kind of trying to figure out who they are other than yourself. So speaking of which, the Indianapolis Colts with $69 million in cap space, the most cap space as they head into free agency. But they have about as much work as anybody does because, of course, the quarterback situation here, like, what are they doing at quarterback? Everyone was celebrating the Carson Wentz departure, and I get it. You didn't feel good about your future with Carson Wentz. You're still hanging on to that emotionally distasteful loss to the Jaguars that eliminated you from the playoffs. All they had to do was beat the worst team in football, and Carson Wentz really did not play well. The entire team didn't play well, but Wentz also really sucked. And there was several games throughout the season where he kind of actively tried to lose games for the Colts. Well, unfortunately, that's the reality when you have a bottom 10 quarterback. Like if you go get a Jameis Winston or you go get a Mariota or a Dalton or Jimmy Garoppolo, that's the world you live in when you have a quarterback like that. But those quarterbacks also are going to give you 8 to 10 solid games. And as long as you put a good team around them, you're going to be in the mix to maybe make the playoffs. So I get you're not excited about the future outlook with Wentz. You're frustrated that he didn't go back to MVP Carson Wentz just because he got reunited with Frank Reich. But they're much worse off after the Carson Wentz trade. And yeah, they got a little more than some people were expecting, a third and maybe a second next year. But it doesn't mean their quarterback situation is solved. All they've done is make it even messier, in my opinion. So that's got to be the big question is, are they thinking about drafting a quarterback? Are they thinking maybe about trading their second round pick for Jordan Love, who they were reported to have had interest in that draft? Are you trading for Jimmy Garoppolo? Like, is that really a win for the Colts if you get a third round this year and you trade your second round pick for Jimmy Garoppolo? I don't think so. Are we sure Jimmy is a better quarterback than Carson Wentz? I think they're in the same tier. Both of them do exactly what I described. They give you about 10 solid games a year and about 6 games where they're actively trying to hurt you. So are you going to be celebrating if they send that second round pick for Jimmy Garoppolo? I sure as hell wouldn't be doing that. Do they just sign Dalton or Mariota, and maybe one of those guys can play like a starting caliber quarterback? But that's not fixing your long-term quarterback there. So that's the big question with Indianapolis. Let's get into what I would do. I would trade that pick for Jordan Love. I've been very vocal on this channel about how I like Jordan Love coming out. I think people are overreacting to that one Chiefs game in Arrowhead, primetime football. His first start had first quarter jitters, like very clearly was nervous. But he did settle in as that game went on. So I would trade the second pick for Jordan Love. And I think Green Bay would probably take that. It's a top 50 pick. And to me, Jordan Love is a better option than any of these rookie quarterbacks that the Colts probably won't be getting anyway unless they trade up. So that's honestly, that is what I would do. I think with an offensive line here, a good play caller, an opportunity to maybe get him another receiver in here, he could really succeed. And you could have a future plan at quarterback as well. Now, I don't know if that's what they will do. I think they probably either trade for Jimmy Garoppolo And God forbid they send that second pick for Jimmy Garoppolo, because then the Carson Wentz trade looks a lot worse. But I think they either get Jimmy or they sign like a Dalton or a Mariota. Maybe they sign a Jameis, which is very similar to having Carson Wentz here, I think. But either way, you're really not terribly excited. I think Jordan Love is the one like high upside move there. But those are your options at quarterback. Let's just talk about everything else they could do here. They actually have a really hefty list of players hitting free agency. So at wide receiver, you have T.Y. Hilton and Zach Pascal. Not stars, but, fringe starter types of guys. Running back Marlon Mack, who just disappeared with Jonathan Taylor's breakout. I could see him having a good second contract for someone else. Tight end Mo Alley Cox kind of becomes a big need all of a sudden to re-sign him because Jack Doyle did retire here, so that tight end room becomes depleted very quickly here. Left tackle Eric Fisher is a big departure. You've got a glaring hole at left tackle now. Your guard, Mark Glowinski, is a free agent. Really good player. I think he knows he's worth probably $8 to $10 million a year. He's played really good football for multiple seasons now. And then on the defense, 3 edge players, Tyquan Lewis, who had a good year for the Colts last year before getting hurt, Al-Qadim Mohammed, who's a good early down run defender for them, and Kamoko Toure, who's a talented pass rusher that has had a really hard time staying healthy. Also in the secondary, Xavier Rhodes, Band-Aid free agent at corner, and safety George Odom, who's a really good special teamer for him. So all these guys have an impact on this team outside of maybe Marlon Mack, but and Kamoko Toure. But I do think with all this cap space, I don't want to just let this entire core group of players leave. I think at this point, these guys will be testing the market, but I think re-signing is likely and would be a good move for Mo Alley Cox, Mark Glowinski at right guard, Tyquan Lewis, and potentially Eric Fisher. Those would be the 4 guys I'm really focusing on, especially Mo Alley Cox. It's a good tight end. He's really improved his blocking as a former basketball star. But yeah, I think with Jack Doyle retiring, Mo Alley Cox is someone I would focus on bringing back here. Mark Glowinski, Reed from Minnesota State came in here. I can't remember his first name. Chris Reed, I think. Played pretty well at right guard, so if you lose Glowinski to this massive contract, it's probably not the end of the world, but you're already at a question mark with Eric Fisher at left tackle. This offensive line is probably their biggest asset, and I don't really want to risk shaking that up. So it's tough because they're paying their center, they're paying their left guard. It's tough to kind of pay 3 interior guys, but I think Glowinski is good enough to do it, and they have the cap space to do it. So I would pay Mark Glowinski at right guard, and then I would re-sign Tyquan Lewis because that edge group just hasn't gotten where you want it to be. The only reason I wouldn't re-sign Tyquan Lewis is if you're going to make a splash for like a big name edge guy. So that's something we'll balance here in a second as we talk about other free agents. But if you can get Tyquan Lewis back for cheap, if nothing else, he can play an early down, big-bodied defensive end role for you. Because you kind of need 3 defensive ends to rotate. So I think Tyquan Lewis is a good player and probably would be pretty cheap for you because he's coming off the injury. And then Eric Fisher, I would want him back. We'll see what his market is. I wouldn't give him a massive contract. I probably wouldn't pay him more than 1 year. But I also don't want a glaring hole at left tackle either when I don't have a first round pick. So I would try to get Eric Fisher back. And then you head into free agency. Your needs are, of course, quarterback. We kind of talked about that situation. Edge, left tackle, depending on what you do with Eric Fisher. Wide receiver is a big need for me. I like Pittman, but he's not a 1. As much as Colts fans want to say he is, he's not a guy that can run the full route tree and separate it at all 3 levels. That's what a number 1 wide receiver is. Michael Pittman is an outstanding, big-bodied, number 2 perimeter guy, just like a Mike Williams is, but you need your Keenan Allen. You need the guy that can line up everywhere, outside and in, and separate against any type of corner. That's not what Michael Pittman is. And then they need another corner. you like what you saw from Isaiah Rodgers, but I don't know if you're trusting him to be your full-time starter next year. So on the, we talked about the quarterback need there. On the edge, I wouldn't be surprised if this team finally kind of went for a bigger name edge player. I like what you have in Kwity Paye, but that's just been, their pass rush just has been underwhelming in the Frank Reich era. So with all of this cap space, I think they might finally be not desperate, but willing enough to go after a Zadarius Smith, whether that's a trade or signing him if he gets cut. Maybe a Chandler Jones. Even like a Jadeveon Clowney would be your best edge guy next to Kwity Paye, that you'd have like 2 number 2s. But I would not be surprised, and I think I would, if I were them, go after one of these bigger name edge guys. And then at left tackle, if you don't get Eric Fisher back, you have to sign somebody that is experienced at left tackle. So, you're probably not getting Teron Armstead here, which would be insane for this offensive line. But after that, you're looking at kind of veteran Band-Aid types. Cornelius Lucas could be an option from Washington. There's a guy in Houston, Jerron Christian. I haven't really mentioned it throughout this series, but he's an impending free agent. He played well at left tackle in place of Laramie Tunsil last year. I think he could be a Band-Aid left tackle. He's kind of a lengthier, decent physical traits. So I think he could be an option. If you wanted to go with more of a long-term contract, there's a player that I didn't think was going to be hitting free agency, but Joseph Noteboom for the Rams. He's been Andrew Whitworth's backup. But with Whitworth very likely to retire, although I haven't heard anything about that. That seemed automatic. But Noteboom was going to slide in as the starting left tackle for the Rams. He played really, really well. Really athletic guy, former 3rd-round pick. I would not be surprised if Joseph Noteboom gets a lot more money than people realize, like 3 years, $45 million, something like that. And if I'm the Colts, I think that would be a good move for you, so you don't have this glaring hole at left tackle. And I look at this draft, and I don't think you're getting a starting caliber left tackle in the 2nd round. So Joseph Noteboom could be an interesting landing spot for the Colts to kind of have the foresight to make that kind of move. And I think it would work out. I think he's a really good player. He just hasn't started a whole lot of games. And then I mentioned wide receiver. I don't think you're going to get a number 1. Allen Robinson's kind of the only guy in the market that's a true number 1 wide receiver. Maybe he would come here, but with the quarterback situation, with his history of who he's dealt with, I have a hard time seeing him doing that again. He's worked with Bortles, Trubisky. He's done the Dalton thing. Like, Dalton might be their quarterback this year. I think he's ready to go somewhere where he can be get a quarterback, be a number 1 receiver. So I don't think you're going to be a big Allen Robinson landing spot, but hey, maybe you can steal DJ Chark interdivision or Will Fuller to be a deep threat here. Would be really great fits as a field stretcher. And then I think you could pay at slot receiver as well. Someone like Christian Kirk. Now, I saw a report 10 million on him, and now I saw a report 15 million is the market on Christian Kirk. I'm not touching him for north of 6. He's not that good of a player. He isn't shown to be, at least. Granted, if you actually play him at slot receiver, unlike where Cliff Kingsbury's been lining him up, maybe he would produce at a much better level, but I would not pay him that much money. You can get a little bit cheaper at slot receiver. Go with like a Jamison Crowder or a Braxton Berrios, but they need more receivers in here. You like Michael Pittman, but you got T.Y. Hilton, Zach Pascal hitting the market. You need different types in here. You need separators deep and over the middle of the field. So that's on offense. And I guess we talked about the edge group. Oh, the only other free agent that I think you sign, and it's just a total no-brainer. Like, I almost think you can pencil this one in, and that's Casey Hayward to the Colts. It makes so much sense because I mentioned Isaiah Rodgers' name. I think he can get to a point, whether it's this season or next season, where he's a starter. Really athletic guy, smart player. But I don't know if he's got the reps to go into next year and you feel great about him as your starting cornerback. So get a veteran in there like Casey Hayward, who every time he plays for Gus Bradley, he balls out. And you get him for a 1-year deal. It's kind of a no-brainer. So Casey Hayward to the Colts feels almost like a lock. So again, a team that's going to be pretty active in free agency. They're going to be pretty active filling their own needs. Because, the Colts have been very inactive in free agency, but it's time for this team to spend some of this cap space. You got $89 million, $69 million in cap space. You don't have to spend all of it, but you can sign some of those names I just mentioned and still be sitting towards the top of the charts as far as free agent cap space heading into next year. You could still carry over if that's what they're trying to do, is build up carryover cap for when they have their quarterback. You can still carry over a good 30, 35 mil and sign some of these guys. So that's the game plan with free agency. It's going to be a busy one for the Colts. And then as far as the draft goes, as I mentioned, I would trade my second round pick for Jordan Love, and then you're just drafting best player available as the rest of the draft goes on. It's pretty straightforward there. If you don't trade that second for Love, I don't know, is a Bernard Raymond, is he there in the second round? I think it's possible. There's a lot of good edge players in this class, so if you don't sign a big name edge player, do you go for an Arnold Ebiketie or something like that? Someone that could be there in the second round. Cornerback and wide receiver in the second round. There's going to be some options there. So that's, there's not a whole lot of draft talk to do with the Colts. And then we're wrapping up with the armpit of the NFL, the Houston Texans. Let's just talk about Deshaun Watson for a second. I think that trade is going to come in here in the next 24 hours or so. There's something I want to talk about that I haven't really talked about yet, and that's why did the Texans have to trade Deshaun Watson? Now, if this is their perspective, I do understand them being like, this is a dirty situation. Let's take the moral high ground. Our team's a disaster. Let's just get some picks for a rebuild and get away from this situation. So from a PR perspective, from, hoping for greener pastures, I understand all that, but you've got Watson holding you hostage. I don't understand why they're not playing more hardball here. For example, like Green Bay did with Aaron Rodgers and kind of like Seattle did with Russ for a couple years. But people forget, I was critical of Deshaun Watson before all of these legal allegations. I was critical of him demanding a trade from the get-go. He demanded a trade within 5 months of signing a, franchise quarterback contract, $100+ million guaranteed, after they had already traded DeAndre Hopkins, while Bill O'Brien was still there. I was critical. I was the only person I heard come out and say, this doesn't really feel right. And then the legal allegations popped up, and I was kind of oh, that's why he wanted out. So if you're the Texans now, after all of this, he sat out for a year, you paid him because he wasn't suspended, right? And he's still out here telling you who he's going to waive your no trade clause for so that he gets to pick where he goes. It's no, fuck you, dude. After all of this, you are going to hold us hostage still. You're already screwing us over because we're going to take on all this dead cap when we trade you. You're already screwing us over. We thought we had our franchise quarterback. You made us panic into the Davis Mills pick. Now you're going to reduce your value with off-field drama and declining trades to other teams. No, we're going to get the best deal we can wherever the hell. If you got to get out of here so specifically, great. But we're going to get the best deal we can. That's your offer. You have an option. You can go there, or you can shut up and stay here and play and fix your reputation and win some football games for us. It's a harsh reality, but that's to me the way I think I would handle this if I'm the Texans. Again, I also understand their perspective of we just kind of want to get rid of this guy. This is kind of this black eye right now that we just want to, get out of here and recover. So I guess if that's their perspective, it makes some sense just from a PR point of view and just a culture point of view. So I see both sides of that argument, but this concept that Watson's like saying, no, I don't want to go to the Eagles, which is also stupid. Like, the Eagles would probably be his best landing spot with a good offensive line and receivers. But he's like saying, no, I'm not going to go to the Eagles and all this stuff. And it's just, the whole situation rubs me the wrong way. It rubbed me the wrong way before all of the legal allegations started. So I just wanted to get that off my chest. But let's talk about the Texans offseason. It's not going to be particularly exciting. This is a team that doesn't have as much cap space as you might think. They have $10 million in cap space. That's 18th most in the league. So they're not going to be like these big spenders in free agency. I really think they're just going to kind of keep doing what they've been doing, and that's collect draft picks, establish a culture with Lovie Smith taking over now. The players really liked Lovie. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some of these impending free agents kind of take discounts to stick around, kind of restore the culture, accrue some of that carryover cap that we've talked about, draft well, and kind of slowly rebuild this thing from the ground up. Because I think that's really all you can do if you're the Texans. So as I look at their list of impending free agents, I was surprised that they didn't franchise tag Justin Reed. He's a really good safety, and he's been kind of a trooper through all of this. So I don't know what the, relationships were like there. If he just really wanted to be out, I would have really tried to re-sign him. But again, kind of the franchise tag is a really good asset for a team. So you're losing your best player. Laramie Tunsil's still there. Who else? Brandon Cooks. Justin Reed's one of your three best players, and you're going to lose him. So that's really tough. He's just walking out the door. So that's unfortunate. It's a lot of veteran guys, a lot of Band-Aids. We talked about Jerron Christian earlier. They don't need him. They have tackles. So he'll probably be out the door. One guy I would re-sign on this list is Malik Collins, who was kind of that veteran retread, but he really balled out for them. He had their best year in Lovie's system, defended the run better than he ever has, and he was a good pass rusher. Between him and what you hope Justin Blacklock can do in year 3 with Jonathan Grenard, potentially drafting a guy like a Kayvon Thibodeau, that defensive line has a lot of potential to actually grow together and be a really good group. But I think Malik Collins is a bit of a core piece of that. So he's kind of the one guy I would really want to get back here, and I think he'd be willing to come back. You can make him one of the better paid players on your defense. I think it would cost you about 2 years, $17 million. Now, it is worth noting that they're going to have a lot more cap space after the Watson trade happens. But I don't think spending a bunch of money in free agency is going to be smart for the Texans. That carryover cap is so underrated, man. The Texans signing a bunch of veterans that are going to play here for 2 years, yes, will help your culture. Yes, it'll help you improve. But I think you can improve and establish your culture just like you did last year without investing a bunch in free agency. And then hopefully you get a quarterback, or God, who knows, maybe Davis Mills turns into, who, by the way, Davis Mills is starting this year. That is kind of a no-brainer for Houston. Maybe Davis Mills shocks the world and develops nicely. He's got all the tools, so it's possible. We've seen third-round quarterbacks, guys like Dak and Kirk, kind of have that in them, so maybe that happens with him. It seems kind of unlikely, but you're taking a season to find out. But yeah, you hope you get a quarterback, you have a bunch of cap space, and in a couple years, you might be in a position to actually compete. But no one's really taken the Houston Texans all that seriously. So when you talk about free agency, I don't think they're going to be very active. When you talk about the draft, their needs are everything, really. I mean, what position groups do they not need? The wide receiver group is fine, but Brandon Cook's not going to be there forever. Everywhere else on offense, you need something. Defense, you could get another number 2 edge. You could get a number 2 interior defensive tackle. The linebacker group needs work. The cornerback group needs work. The safety group needs work with Justin Reed. So, like, you're going best player available in the draft. You're sticking true to your board and just trying to get good players in here fast. And you're probably going to have an extra, handful of picks thanks to Deshaun Watson as well. So pretty straightforward to the Texans. I'm glad I just kind of got my Deshaun Watson opinion out there. And we're just going to have to move on at this point. It is what it is. But I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think. What do you think about my stance on the Texans and how they're handling Deshaun Watson? Am I crazy to say those things? But let me know in the comments down below. I hope you guys enjoyed this series. I will be live tomorrow for the, the legal tampering period. I'm supposed to get some cavities filled in the afternoon. I'm going to try and reschedule that. Otherwise, I just might be high on like pain medicine when we're here. But the show must go on either way. So that could be interesting. We'll see you guys tomorrow. I appreciate you guys for watching. We'll see you then. Peace.